Week 2 in the sermon series on Samuel. Keeping up with the Joneses, aka the Philistines. Samuel is growing in faithfulness and judgment, living into his unique call as prophet, priest, and judge. Times are going to be bad before they're going to be good. This is where we ended last week as we began our tour of the life and times of Samuel, a judge, priest, and prophet. We learned how Samuel was born to a woman thought to be barren, a metaphor for God's gracious intervention into the depraved then current state of Israel, where everyone did right in their own eyes. We read that he was brought to the temple to live with Eli the priest. We discovered that Eli was a tragic figure. The moral quotient of the priesthood had been decimated under his watch as he exercised no control over the voracious appetites of his wayward sons, Hophni and Phinehas. In other words, when we meet Samuel this morning, he has his work cut out for him. He needs to do God's bidding and root out evil. He needs to restore Israel's unity and its devotion to the Lord as it seeks to establish itself in the promised land. It's a tall, tall order. And we will come to find out that the key to his success is that it doesn't occur to him that he is a self-made hero. He never makes a move without seeking God's guidance. You might have noticed that we jumped from chapters 1 and 3 last Sunday to chapters 7 and 8 this Sunday, with the 3 intervening chapters omitted. Their content is not directly about Samuel, and yet the adventures of chapters 4, 5, and 6 make clear that Samuel's prophecies are true, that the house of Eli will end, that the Israelites need to turn to the Lord in order to experience victory. There's intrigue and dramatic tension in this section as the Philistines, Israel's nemesis at the time, get the upper hand and capture the Ark of God, the symbol of God's presence and power bestowed on the Israelites. Hophni and Phinehas, the ones who wheeled the Ark out and into battle, are slaughtered and destroyed, just as Samuel foretold. And Eli, upon hearing the news, falls over backward, breaks his neck, and dies at age 98. Colorful stuff. At this confluence of crises, no priesthood and no ark, Samuel takes center stage and lays the facts on the line to the Israelites, saying essentially, get your act together and serve the Lord and the Lord only. Only then will you be delivered. As chapter 7 opens, the people of Israel gather at Mizpah and call upon Samuel to intercede on their now repentant behalf. Samuel does. The Philistines are subdued, and Israel is restored. The ark, which was recently returned to the Israelites, is kept safe, and as we just read, Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. He tours Bethel, Gilgal, and more, administering justice, as one would hope a judge would do. As chapter 8 begins, there's a fly in the ointment. Samuel might be a good judge, just as Eli was likely at one time a good priest. But alas, Samuel's sons, Joel and Abijah, are not. They take bribes, pervert justice. Samuel recognizes what's wrong, it's disregard for the Lord. But the people of Israel have something else on their minds. Check out what our neighbors are doing, they say. Let's get ourselves a king that will lead us into victory. A king that will be powerful, a king that will show the world that we've made it. Samuel is not amused. The Israelites have the order of things all backwards. They're not supposed to tell God what they need. God's supposed to tell them. And Samuel suspects that keeping up with the Philistines is not what God has in mind. Samuel prays and seeks the Lord's guidance. Imbued with human emotion, God reacts and is offended. Sam, my friend, it's not a commentary against you. It's against me. They don't want me as their king. Well, so be it, the Lord says. Only tell them what is in store. So Samuel does. We just read it. He warns you'll be enslaved. You'll be oppressed. You'll be robbed of your wealth and your livelihood. You'll rue the day you went down this road, yet by that point it'll be too late. God won't answer when you call. After all, you're trading places with God when you make this choice. The people are determined and Samuel is appalled. Yet he follows the will of the Lord and allows them the freedom they crave to make their own choice, write their own script. But they must accept the consequences. And this is where we end today, to be continued next Sunday. Perhaps you know a little Bible history. You're aware that the era of the kings goes on to last several hundred years, and Samuel's warning is right. It doesn't turn out well. Many scholars concur that neither Samuel nor the Israelites could have possibly known all of this in advance, as the system of judges was becoming so dysfunctional. They postulate that given the book of First Samuel was likely written centuries after the era it describes, later authors placed warnings about kingship on Samuel's lips. Authors disillusioned by the monarchy that they knew had gone down. They knew how the story had unfolded, and the fact is, the Bible is rich and complex and compiled over many centuries by many people, so the theory has merit. Yet whether the warning is one written with history and hindsight in view, or is the literal prognostication of a man filled with wisdom and divine insight, either way, it speaks to our experience and calls us to do some of our own soul searching and inventory taking. For in the first place, we see ourselves in the Israelites longing for a king. They want the same thing their seemingly powerful and successful neighbors have. We all know what envy looks like and feels like. We can criticize the Israelites all we want, yet envy continues to be a disposition we all struggle with. And indeed, it's one of the engines that propels the consumer-based culture in which we navigate. You know how the cycle goes. Happens with everything from smart technology gadgets to fashion trends to late model sports cars. We see others using them and we admire them. But that's not where it ends. Next thing that happens, we want them. And then, when the advertising industry pitches the underlying refrain that we deserve it, why, before you know it, the wants transform themselves into needs. But why stop there? When the so-called needs aren't met, they become obsessions, all of which results in being envious over that which we do not have, rather than being grateful for the gifts we've been given and the opportunities that these offer. So on the one hand, today's installment calls us to humble ourselves and be honest. Where does envy lurk in our lives? What do we want that is not ours and nags at us? A more luxurious house? A different lifestyle? A different job? A larger bank account? Someone else's personality? What is it that robs us of our sense of contentment by wanting what someone else has? What diminishes our gratitude to God for the blessings we do have and the sense of wonder over the undeserved, unexpected gifts that do come our way? Today's lesson invites our personal reflection. There's something else today's reading brings to light. Along with envy, there's another dynamic in play that we do well to remember. Notice how the Israelites are consumed by their desire for a king. They note the flaws of Samuel's sons, become obsessed with the desire to become powerful and mighty, and so they jump headlong into a new way of governance and a new way of understanding God's reign over them, and they do not count the cost. They do not consider the possible pitfalls. The tyranny of the urgent causes them to forget, to stop and pray, and wait on the Lord. I find this part of the lesson perhaps more troubling, more difficult to process. After all, in 1 Samuel, God has an ongoing dialogue with Samuel like they're meeting for Starbucks coffee or something. Samuel has a direct connection to the absolute truth of God. Well, I don't know about you, but my experience of God hasn't been so transparent. I can't always tell if I have waited or waited long enough on the Lord to hear an answer, as Samuel does. The guidance of God is often shrouded in mystery. And yet I believe firmly that it is still something we must grapple with. For I am convinced that God is still speaking. God does seek to guide our steps. Perhaps we don't meet God at Starbucks, but we do utter words of spirit-filled truth and guidance as we bear each other's burdens. I believe in the power of the Christian community. And I am convinced that prayer can open hearts and minds to possibilities for peace and purpose, even amidst troubled circumstances. I believe God is calling us to experience God's presence in word and sacrament, find strength to wait on the Lord rather than be impetuous and short-sighted.